All right.
We're all set.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone, on this lovely Wednesday, October 27th, 2021. This is the City of Battle Creek, Michigan Airport Advisory Board meeting for October. We can do a quick roll call for the members that are present. I know there's some other folks on here, but let's just do a roll call for the members, and I'll just call you off and just say if you're here. And so, Scott, T.R. Shaw,
Here.
Katie Ferris,
Present from Battle Creek, Michigan.
you, Ted Dittering,
Battle Creek, Michigan.
thank you, Larry Bowen,
Present. Battle Creek, Michigan.
Joe Soborowski,
Present, Battle Creek, Michigan.
Tim Osterhaus,
Present, Battle Creek.
Kara Beer,
Present, Battle Creek, Michigan.
Alana White,
Present, Battle Creek, Michigan.
Colonel Holtz,
Present, Battle Creek, Michigan.
Vester Davis. Am I missing anyone? Okay, I think we have a quorum. All right, just a little bit of housekeeping. It looks like we have a new Assistant Aviation Director. We have Phil Kroll. Hi, Phil. Welcome.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you.
And I'm sure everybody will be getting to know you in the ensuing weeks and months and hopefully years. Let's just start going through here. Did everyone get a chance to review the agenda? Anything to add or detract from it?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Katie
Support.
Ferris, support.
Or
All those in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, the agenda's been approved. Has everyone been able to review the minutes from the last meeting? Okay, can I get a motion?
I move to approve the minutes from September.
Second.
All right, any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the September 22nd, 2021 minutes, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we have some old business, governance review, and we have an update on the governance review activities.
Hi, this is Penny from SBA. So the update on the activities is we have been.
I would effectively call a couple workarounds.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought someone else was talking.
No, I think you're all right, Penny.
Oh, okay. So anyway, we've spent most of our time since the last meeting working on the financial presentation, both to give the overall picture of where the airport is now, and then to develop numbers and forecasts for the 3 separate models that the board decided on last time to look at in a further way. It's a lot of information, and we had originally intended to present both of those things today, but we thought that we really wouldn't have time to get into to show you all the numbers for all of the 4 separate scenarios and have a good discussion about it. So today what we're planning is to just show you about the airport's financial picture today, and because that is the foundational information that we used in order to build the forecasts for the 3 specific models under consideration. And then I think we spoke with the excuse me, we spoke internally about this, that because we have this sort of extra data to present to you, we would either need to hopefully schedule a second meeting in November or December to kind of be able to contain that, or else have to push the schedule out a little longer. So, we can discuss that at the end if you like, Commissioner Lance, but I just wanted to present that as a possibility of what we're thinking about because of the extra information.
Okay. What we probably can do is send around some dates and times for a second meeting in either November or December. We'll send some around and see what members are able to attend. Sound fair?
Okay. Yeah, no, that sounds great. And anyway, I'd like to present Spencer Gillette and Steve Bush, my colleagues, who really did the bulk of the research on this and putting the information together. And so I'm going to turn it over to Spencer and Steve to go through it. And if people have questions as we go through, please feel free to ask before we get to the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny, and thank you, Chair Lance. To add on to what Penny was discussing regarding upcoming meetings, we also have Grand Valley working on the economic impact study. They most recently had a meeting last week to gather some additional information, and they will be wrapping up their analysis and report on that as well. So at the next meeting, we hope to report on that in addition to the forecasting elements. Larry, you could next slide for me. Thank you. So today's discussion is going to be the part one. So that's going to include really an overview of what we took a look at, some context and background regarding finances at the airport, both the revenue and expense side, and a comparison of those, and some initial summary findings for this part one. The overview itself, of course, as Penny had mentioned, today we're going to be looking at the current state of the airport and some of the history behind the finances. But next meeting, we're going to be getting into those three models: the Regional Airport Authority, the Operating Board, and the Community Airport Authority model, and take a look at some predictions and some forecasting on what those might look like, and as well report out on our recommendations from those findings. So as an initial point of context, this financial analysis is to support any governance recommendation from this board and overall as a point of information for decision making. And that's really important to help understand the current financial picture and the potential of the airport regarding its self-sustainability. During a transition, the FAA is going to require that a plan is in place either for the airport to be self-sustainable on its own, or that there is going to be a mechanism for support. In this case, for one by the city of Battle Creek, or under another model, like the Community Airport Authority model, if it were to partner with another entity, support from those groups. So that we'll get into some more of that on how that might look in the next meeting. But in general, this is also going to help provide some areas of identifying improvements that can help the overall financial picture of the airport. A big piece of airport revenue comes from land leases. Today, this is a list of some of your airport tenants, including Duncan, Waco, Western, the FAA, Air National Guard, and other T hangars and box hangars. We have members of those groups present on this board, as well as on the committee. And those are really important stakeholders and really large contributors to helping the airport run and operate in its revenue base. The airport land that is currently developed today includes 144 aeronautical acres and just over 18 non-aeronautical. What's available is 170 aeronautical acres and 104 non-aeronautical. So combined, that's over 270 acres that are available for development. And in our forecasting, the next section, we're going to talk about how that might impact the finances as well. This is a visual of that. The blue area represents the current areas that are developed for aeronautical uses. The yellow represents the areas that are non-aeronautical, whereas the red are areas that aren't able to be developed. It's a little hard to see probably on your screen, but there is a section on the west side. It's a blue hash, and that is the largest piece. Thank you, Larry. That is the largest piece of area that is available for development, future development, that is, and one of the charges of this board as well. Other impacts that the airport gains revenue from are the fuel flowage fee. Currently that's set at 15 cents per gallon, and landing fees, which range depending on the gross landing weight of an aircraft. Some examples here are the Cirrus SR-20. Currently that is a free landing, and a PC-12 would be about $50 per landing. And going up from there up to where it's more than 130,000 pounds of an aircraft, like a 747, that's going to be charged on a per 1,000 pound basis at $245 per 1,000 pounds. And that, just to give you an example, is a minimum of $318.50. That said, those landing fees directly are impacted by the operations at the airport. From 2016 to 2020, this chart is showing some of the increases there. Just as in all airports throughout the country, they were severely impacted by COVID-19 in 2020. And that's where you can see that just over 10,000 reduction in operations from 2019, which was the highest at about just over 85,000 operations. So really good year as far as operations. Larry, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was the third highest in the state as far as operational numbers in 2019. Next slide. So this is those same operations, but broken up between local based and itinerant aircraft. So local is going to be any operation that is within a 20-mile radius of the airport. Typically, that's going to be the flight training through Western or other aircraft that are flying, maybe going out to a practice area and coming back. That's going to be included in the local, whereas everything in the blue here is the aircraft that are coming from further away into the airport and making up that total number we had just seen. Starting to get into the finances. So that was a lot of information that really just shows what the airport's looking like as far as the overall operation and some of the basics on how the airport is gaining its revenue. And here are some additional examples. We have hangar rent, including aircraft landing fees, fuel flowage fees, aircraft parking, and apron fees, and even snow removal is one of the areas of revenue for the airport today. Other airports not included on this. Some airports choose to operate their own FBO. That would make this list a little bit different because, for instance, a fuel flowage fee might not be charged if they're the sole operator of the FBO. But here today, these are the main points of revenue. And the rates for these are typically established based on fair market value and competitive market conditions. So that's going to be taking a look at not only the regional area, but also at other airports a little further out in the region, and maybe direct competitors or very comparable airports such as Battle Creek to another. Next slide, please, Larry.
I just wanted to add one comment that, so for example, snow removal, when we recover and generate revenue for snow removal, that's a break even. So we're simply covering the labor cost. And then we typically use an MDOT-C schedule, which says, what's the rate you can recover for a piece of equipment. But so when we speak of something like this as revenue, it's simply break even revenue. It's not, we're not making money on this.
That's a good point. Thank you, Larry. This is a 5-year financial picture of the revenue from 2016 to 2020. You can see some increase there from 2016 up to 2018, and it's dropped back down slightly from there. 2018, you can see the makeup. This is a summary makeup of the line items, but the TIFA transfers equated to almost 800,000 there. That's a really big portion in 2018. You can see that's one of the reasons why the revenue went down in 2019 and 2020 when you look at the overall total revenue. But in general, it's holding fairly consistent, or just shy of that, around that 2 million mark for total revenue.
Yeah, Spencer, I'd like to point out also this FAA hangar rent that may put a question mark in your mind. It's $404,400. So that's a unique revenue stream in that it was originally based on the facility when it was constructed by the Battle Creek Building Authority 25 some odd years ago. The original lease was 20 years, and it was tied to the debt service. At the close of that first 20-year term, we were unable to negotiate amicable terms with the FAA, and so they chose to go into holdover, amazingly enough. And so like 160 some odd thousand of this was really going towards debt service. So we've been very fortunate in that we've been able to offset the TIFA subsidy and some other costs with this additional revenue coming from the FAA. Does that make sense to everybody?
And this is just a little closer picture. It might be easier to read this slide for 2019 and 2020. Give you a closer look. In going to what Larry just pointed out, the FAA hangar rent is a very large contributor to overall revenue, and it's sitting at about 21% in 2020. From operating revenues itself, in that section there, the FBO and facility leases is at 22% of airport revenue. And the single largest source of overall revenue has been the TIFA in 2020, and it was at 26% of airport revenue. Moving on to the airport expenses. Most airports have all these expenses listed here. You'll see personnel wages and salaries and benefits combined is going to be the highest expense, and that's very common amongst all airports. Those areas are typically the highest. We also have materials and supplies, other professional services such as consultants like us or engineers, utilities at the airport to keep all the lights running, and water and everything else is another cost, and other capital outlays, including equipment and technology and other land purchases that might be necessary to operate the airport. This is, again, a 5-year look at those expenses as steadily increased from 2016 to 2020. I'll have you go to the next slide, Larry. It might be a little easier for people to read. In 2020 here, you can see that the total expenses were 2.1 million, and personnel being a larger cost of that. That includes those salaries and benefits, that number, the 1.19 million. Whereas materials and supplies was only 155,000, and the total contracts in other areas was at 770,000.
Quick question for Steve Bush. Maybe Spencer can comment on this. Under total personnel, did that include allocations from the allocations that we received from the other city departments? Where did you put those? You're muted, Steve. Steve Bush, you're muted.
Larry, if you go to the next slide, you might be able to see some of the breakdown. So this is the breakdown of the numbers that we have for the personnel and benefits. That's going to include retirement as well as the healthcare. And right now, the line item for allocations from the city is at 0. So I do believe that that either the personnel or the professional services line items would have included those costs.
When I look at this, it looks like it's in professional services.
Yes, they're Larry there and Chair Lance. The city expenses are all in the contract and other services. That is the way it's showing in the actual amount. And then and this is part of what we'll get into later in the next presentation as a possible recommendation, is to either show it all as allocations from the city or show it as contract and other services from the city. It's an actual expense shows up in professional services and other, and then there's no allocations. But when you go to the budget, the allocations are shown. So it would be a little cleaner if we chose one way to do both budget and actual.
Okay, and simply, just for the benefit of the group, the allocations are charges from other departments in the city. For example, we use the city's mail service. So there's a charge. We use, we don't provide our own IT services. We benefit from the provision of IT services through the city as a whole. And so that's what those allocations are. But they're all a cost of doing business. Next slide. What do you want to do, Spencer?
Yeah, just a quick point out that going back one slide, Larry, that we did some calculations and the personnel benefits was at 56% of all airport expenses, and contracts and other equated to 36%. So combined, that's over 90%, and makes up the bulk of it. But there are other costs as well that are in here, and that are the materials and supplies, and some other capital outlays as well that impact the expense side.
Yeah, and I might add, there are other expenses that we don't see at all. For example, we enjoy the benefit of a federal air traffic control tower contract, because when you crunch the math and you come up with a cost benefits ratio, the FAA says that it's 100% worth it. But that contract tower is probably, or the air traffic control tower contract is probably worth $1 million, $1.25 million. But because our benefit ratio, based on our activity levels and a lot of other criteria, we don't have to participate with any of that. Should that number fall below 1.0, say it falls to 0.8, we would now be on the hook for 20% of that contract cost, and the feds would pay 80%. But our BC ratio is like 1.49. So it would take a substantial change to the airport as we know it today in order to fall below 1.0. But I just offer that because it's not cheap to run an airport, but we have the help. We have a lot of help in federal grants and different things. So,
Spencer, if you don't mind, I just wanted to make 2 quick comments too regarding revenue and expenses. It's the percentage of personnel wages and benefits that is typically across the board at airports the largest single expense for running operations. So Battle Creek is very typical in that sense with other airports. However, in terms of revenue, many airports, and even especially those who have commercial service, but even some smaller GA airports, one of their largest areas of revenue is parking, and that's not really showing up in terms of Battle Creek. So I just wanted to point out the ways that Battle Creek is like other airports in terms of expenses, but a little bit different from other airports in terms of revenue.
That's a great point, Penny. Rental car as well. And, we have some rental car business, Duncan uses that, but a lot of other airports, there's a service fee every time a car gets rented and it shows up at the airport. That's not a revenue stream that we currently enjoy.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And just to piggyback on Penny's point on the personal and benefit side, there's on that table, and we'll see it once again coming up, but the overall overtime was quite low as well. We've seen that definitely high at other airports. So the staff that you currently have today is operating well within their current limitations of staffing. So that was a good point too. This slide on total revenue and expenses just shows you where that's sitting. And please take note that this slide also includes the TIFA transfers. So what would be a form of support for the airport to get to this point to where these are almost balancing out. A couple years, you can see where it's higher, and then 2020, the total expense was a little higher than the revenue. Going into the next slide for me, Larry. We'll just take a look at the side by side real quick. So you can see here the overtime costs I was mentioning was at the 20,000 mark. You know, it's pretty good. You know, with the unknown of winter operations, especially, that number can definitely fluctuate over time to accomplish clearing the runway and making sure the airport is staffed for that. So we think that's looking pretty good on the expense side, and the revenue side as well. You know, in this particular year, there was 191,000 deficit, but the other years, as you'll see, Larry, next slide for me, please. You're going to see that with that support, the airport financially is doing pretty good. And the 2018 numbers here really help the airport. So having a year like 2020, despite COVID, despite the lower operations, everything else, you know, the airport's able to balance that out. Now, it's really not a trend that the airport wants to be on. So I think it's in the future, as we look at the governance and look at going forward, we're going to have some recommendations for you on how to get that back to positive. Next slide for me, Larry. Thank you. The biggest concern, though, is that the airport does rely on the TIFA transfer. So we want to have the airport be in a position where it can be more self-sustaining and growing its own revenue, so it doesn't have to rely on these transfers, because without them, you can see in every year from 2016 to 2020, that support's really carried the airport. Some pretty low or high numbers here, depending on how you see them, that we want to try to change the trajectory of those and help the airport. So with that, these are some revenue options to consider for the airport, not only if it changes its governance model, but also as it currently operates today. And really, our recommendation is try to look at all opportunities. Above all else, look at every opportunity, reach out to your existing tenants, try to seek additional land development. And we know you're doing that through help with the BCU and the city itself, and putting this board together with its charge. So that is a great first step. Another thing that can be done is, as the leases are brought up and old leases expire, trying to transfer everyone over to the new leasing agreement structure. We know there's one currently in place. I believe it was put into place a couple of years ago. Larry might be able to give an exact time frame, but we want to make sure that every tenant ends up becoming on that new leasing structure, which is really going to help with consistency across the board when it comes to land leases. And then also ensuring that market rates when those leases are signed, especially new leases, are being used and charged and negotiated upon the execution of the lease. And that can be done through routinely surveying those regional airports and other comparable airports to get their right rates, understand what those are at, and that's going to really help when it comes to establishing new leases for the airport in Battle Creek. Landing fees should also be analyzed based on a break-even calculation. Steve, I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about this. This is something that you had pointed out, something they might be able to talk about with the FAA as well regarding the multi-tiered cost structure.
Yeah, thank you. It would be good, and maybe the airport is operating landing fees at a possible surplus, but it's hard to tell without doing an actual calculation of going through all of your field and runway taxiway expenses to have an idea, and then going through your landing fees to make sure that those numbers are at least equal. If they're not, then I think there needs to be some type of an adjustment to the landing fee or restructuring of the landing fee to make it break even. One of the things we toyed with, and it's down here, and it's something that the airport, either by itself or conjunction with us, to talk to the FAA about the potential of a multi-tiered cost structure or rate structure for itinerant versus local aircraft, so that the local people are paying probably a little less, and the itinerant should be using or should be paying slightly more, so that they offset the use of the land and airport.
Thank you, Steve. The other recommendation we have here at the end is trying to develop some type of cost recovery method for the apron areas. There's a large amount of apron areas at the airport, and there needs to be a way to account for that, account for the maintenance, account for the snow removal, and all the costs associated with those aprons. So there's a couple different ways that could be done. One is through a leasing option, and another is through parking charges. That's aircraft parking charges for the use of those areas. Is another recommendation we have.
Spencer, if I could, just for the benefit of the Airport Advisory Board members, just want to touch on a couple of these bullets. So this bullet right here, update tenants to all new BTL leasing. You had mentioned that we had began using that. So probably 5 years ago or so, we hired a company called Aviation Management Consulting Group, and they provided us with a new lease structure. You have to remember that leases are a snapshot in time. And you can have a lease structure that's pretty outdated, that it may have practices or allow certain practices that lending agencies no longer condone. There could be a whole series of things that just really are not beneficial for the city as the airport sponsor or the tenant. But nonetheless, you have these snapshots in time that exist. So we have two tenants that are on the new format. Waco Aircraft Corporation is on the new form, and then Tim Brucci's standalone box hangar is on that form as well. And then I think Ben can nod or not, but I think Duncan's lease of the former Kellogg hangar is under that same format. So we're slowly transitioning to that new format, which again is not a one-sided lease. It's better for both parties. This item, sure, market rates are being charged. This year, we went back to Aviation Management Consulting Group, and they did a complete rates and charges for us. And so we have what we believe to be market rates. They split the airport into I think 4 different areas, depending on the type of infrastructure that was available in those areas. So we are now able to do exactly this, to at least start our arm's length agreements and our negotiations with what we would say are our current market rates. And the landing fees, last thing I just want to mention is for years, the FBOs collected these fees on behalf of the city, and then kept a portion of it as per a previous agreement, and then passed on the balance to the city. We changed that format several years ago, and we started doing it in-house. We were utilizing interns. Unfortunately, the intern positions fell off of our books during COVID and haven't made it back yet. But we switched to a company called Vector, and Vector is doing a really good job. It's a tedious task, but they have access to databases. You know, you can spend a lot of time tracking down somebody that really wasn't a customer of our FBO. They were just an itinerant airplane that came in, but there's some masking going on with end numbers, and it's really, you're not really sure who owns the company, and therefore you're not really sure who you should pay your landing fee. Well, we've made a lot of progress with Vector. So that's just 3 areas where I wanted to bring the Airport Advisory Board up to speed as to what we've done over the course of the last 5 or 6 years.
And Larry, can you explain for the board a little bit about how it's important to understand if they've used the FBO or not, so they're aware? I think that's important to share.
Well, you know, if they're utilizing the FBO, they're purchasing services. And so that goes a long way, but we don't, like, for example, the old format, the FBOs were allowed to waive our landing fee if an aircraft purchased a service from them. And that was a very, 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 very old practice. That's not something that's a current practice today, wherein the airport sponsor would allow a tenant to waive a landing fee. Now, if a tenant is leasing the Apron outside of their building and they have what we call an RON, or remain overnight fee, that is a little more common to say, hey, you come in, you're buying fuel, we're working on your aircraft, we're going to waive that parking fee. But we don't currently have any RON fees. So I think what the summary and findings is just trying to get at is there's some room here. The question I have is, how much room is there? You know, we certainly don't think we can get where we need to be on our existing tenant base. It goes without saying that we need to grow the tenant base.
Yes, so we would agree. We're going to explore that in the next part 2, forecasting a little bit on what it's going to look like if the airport does grow its tenant space, and it certainly is going to help. One last recommendation we have, something the airport could consider doing is a utility audit. This is typically charged at no cost to the airport, because when the company comes in to perform this audit, they will use about 33 to 50% of the savings that are recovered from that utility audit itself. And that just also helps validate that the airport is being charged correctly and is included in their proper class of business, and is a pretty common thing to have done. Are there any questions based on this for us as a company? Steve and I are both able to answer any questions for anyone.
I just want to raise one more point. It's probably easier for me to raise this because I'm a couple of days from retirement, but I think it's very important for the community, this group of people, to understand that, you know, revenues and expenses are going to fluctuate. You're going to have some years where you're going to have additional costs. Maybe they were planned, maybe they weren't planned. Revenues can fluctuate. We used to have what was called a joint use agreement with the military, and that was $55,000 a year. But when the military lost their aviation-based mission and the entire budget that comes with it, they didn't have the wherewithal to continue that revenue stream, and the airport joint use agreement went away. So in a case like that, you know, if for every dollar that we lose in revenue, or every dollar that we have in an increased expense, that subsidy gets impacted. And so while it may look like a moving target, that's really just, that's kind of the nature of the beast, if you will. But I think this has been a really good summary. I think what it indicates is that the airport in and of itself, irregardless of who's here, has the propensity to be self-sustaining. And I think that's a critical thing as you, the Airport Advisory Board, look at the decision that you're going to be asked to make towards the end of this year. And that primarily is going to come from lease of land. Okay, that's where we really make our money. If we raise a fuel flowage fee from 15 cents to 16 cents, we might make an extra $7,000. $7,000 is not going to put a very big dent in a $500,000 subsidy. But if we can lease 20 acres on the west side of the airfield at a market rate, we could knock out $300,000 of that, maybe more. If a tenant, you know, we enjoyed some increased revenue from the recent expansions at Waco. So while it may look like a bit of a moving target, in my 22 and a half years here, my 30 years in the industry, and from what Baldwin's presented you today, I want to encourage you as a community that I believe this airport can and will be self-sufficient one day.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you for the presentation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Chair Lance, do you mind if I just add a quick thing to what Larry said?
No, feel free, Penny.
Yeah, no, thank you. I just wanted to reinforce that, because I think the key to the airport being self-sustainable absolutely is bringing in new tenants, leasing new land, increasing those things, right? The land parcel for development is very key here. So many, but so I think your charge is to really consider and choose the new governance model that's going to make that ability to advertise, lease, and develop that land. Which model is going to facilitate that the best? Because that's really going to be the key, the realistic key, right? So, thank you.
Well, speaking of development of that land, I think if anyone else has any comments before we move on to the next item on the agenda. All right, let's talk a little bit about the West Side development. Joe Soborowski. Hello?
Looks like Joe may be having a connection problem. I think what we were hoping to hear from was just an update on the Build Back Better grant application. Joe's team and the entire community have met. They've had several meetings with, looks like Joe maybe.
I'm back.
There he is. Yeah, Joe, I mean, if you could just take a moment just to kind of explain all the hard work your team has put into the Build Back Better, the status of that grant application and what you think the future holds. I think that would be very.
Yeah, so just a real high level, as part of some of the various federal packages that have come out, the EDA was given well over $1 billion. And part of one of the buckets was the Build Back Better Industry Cluster Challenge. And what that is the EDA is looking for the establishment of industry clusters that are going to help a community or region overcome or recover from the COVID pandemic. So we've been working with Larry, the city, and many others on the UAS, which more commonly known as drone initiative. We did a feasibility study in 2018, and the feasibility study said it was a really good place to pursue this. So then a few years later, this Build Back Better Challenge comes out. It was due October 19th. It's a two-part. So you apply by October 19th. You have to create a coalition members being other economic development organizations, municipal partners, City of Battle Creek, Calhoun County, many others. And they asked for a proposal. So we put a proposal together. These proposals they were asking between $25 and $75 million. And you could qualify, some can even qualify for up to $100 million. The first phase is supposed to be awarded in December. Phase one would be award up to $500,000 to 50 to 60 applicants across the country to further flush out their projects. So you could get up to $500,000 to further flush out your project, get professional services involved, make sure your numbers are correct. We submitted a proposal for $57 million with a handful of projects. Let me just give you an idea of project. Building a bridge to the west side of the airport. That would be one project with a price tag associated with it. Taxiway, runway, that would be an additional project. Educational component with Western Michigan and KCC, that would be an additional component. So we've got about 6 to 7 projects totaling $57 million. That is we have in total about 40 support letters, and that's a combination of coalition members and supporting organizations. So we've got broad coverage. So we feel like we got a really good application. It's going to be highly competitive, but if you equate it to the 2000s, the Obama era administration stuff, shovel ready, I think we've got a shovel ready project. And so we're just in a waiting pattern now. If we're invited to, so once you get the 500,000, you get a period of time to fully flush it out. Then you're invited to resubmit for the grander 57 million or whatever million project it is. And then that's supposed to be awarded sometime in third quarter of 2022. So I don't know if the federal government can work that quick, but our application's in.
Great, Joe. Thank you. Again, if Battle Creek Unlimited and the city of Battle Creek are successful with an endeavor like this, self-sufficiency is right under our nose. Again, it's a process that we have to go through, but everything we've done over the course of the last 10 years in partnership with Battle Creek Unlimited has led up to that. And that's not the only economic development prospect that's come across the radar. While I understand that this subsidy is a concern to everybody, whether the airport's in the general fund, whether it's in the TIFA, I just want to stress that it's equally important that we, as a group, look at this form of governance and say, what can get us there the quickest? What's going to make us more nimble, more business nimble? What's going to allow us to respond to these market forces? Joe's organization, Battle Creek Unlimited, has to be very nimble. They have to be able to respond. And that's what comes with this whole notion of looking at our form of governance. So that's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you, Joe. Do we have any people in the queue for public comment, Sarah?
No, I don't think we have anybody for public comment, Jim.
Okay. Any members? You guys have anything to add or any issues you want to raise today?
I've just got one thing here. Just want to let everybody know. I've been working with the committee for the centennial coming up. We've got a group of historians that are going through the files right now, working on putting together a book. And then on November 8th, we're going to have another kind of history session to start doing some more work on that. But in the afternoon, we're going to have a sort of a brainstorming session on what the centennial is going to look like, what we want to do, just some ideas. And if anybody's interested in joining that, let me know, or let Penny know out of the office, and we can get you an invite for that meeting. It'll be there in the boardroom. So, but it is moving forward. 2024 is the centennial. We're not sure if we're going to do a series of events, one big event. That's all kind of in the works right now. So that's where we stand with that. And if anybody wants to help, if you know other people who'd be interested in doing some of this work that we're doing right now, let me know. Thanks.
Thanks, TR. Go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, thank you. I wondered if we could just take a moment here before we end this meeting to recognize and acknowledge Larry's service to the airport. He mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, and maybe Chairman Lance, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder by doing this, but he mentioned a minute ago that he is very close to retirement at this point. He will actually retire by the end of the month. And, Larry's service to this airport over 21 plus years has been exemplary. I think you can see just from this process how knowledgeable he is about the airport, how fortunate we have been over the years to have him both in charge of helping to develop, but also ensuring compliance here in Battle Creek. So, we are thrilled that Philip is here, but we recognize that Larry's shoes are big shoes to fill. We certainly wish him the best. And I think in an ideal world, there might be an opportunity to still partner with Larry on a project or two in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you, Ted. And obviously, Larry, you have a countdown clock, much like the two teams that are playing in East Lansing this weekend. But I think you're probably going to be a little happier no matter what at the end of your countdown clock. So we appreciate your service, obviously, and looking forward to still dealing with you and having you participate in this airport and, of course, in your future.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. All right. I do not see any other members having any comments. So with that, we will adjourn today's meeting and look forward to seeing everybody at the next meeting, and we'll send out an email for a second meeting in November or early December.